Hopefully you can all see that slide. So good day, everyone. Yes, I'm Dr. Murray Dixon from Defense R&D CORA, the Center for Operational Research and Analysis. And for the next 15 minutes or so, I will give you an update on basically the wargaming or gaming activity that has been going on within CORA over 2021. So here's an overview of the brief. I'll acknowledge a few people and get into some of the highlights of what we've been doing in 2021. I did want to put a spotlight on a couple of the activities that we did in 2021, because I think they have particular value to this community in terms of some lessons learned and some tips and tricks for successful wargaming. And then a quick couple of slides on where I think CORA is headed with gaming in the coming years. So first of all, a quick acknowledgement to Ben, Greg Van Bavel, Kyle Christensen, and George Nikolakakis, all colleagues of mine from CORA who have very kindly provided inputs to me on this presentation, as I'm not personally involved in all the activities I'll be talking about, and these folks actually are. Okay, so what are the highlights? Well, first of all, obviously COVID has been affecting everybody, starting from early 2020 until today, and we're still feeling the effects of the COVID pandemic on our work activities and in particular our gaming activities. So certainly early in 2020, CORA, like everybody else, started moving to online and distributed kinds of wargaming in order to continue with the gaming. We just couldn't do it in person, of course. So that meant in our particular case, some of our activities had to be put on hold, and I'll mention a couple of those in just a couple of slides. So some of the activities had to be on hold because we couldn't be in the office and couldn't be face-to-face. But in the end, that turned out to be an opportunity to explore new kinds of initiatives through online gaming. And in particular, we have obviously started working with Global Affairs Canada and Madeline in particular on some activities over the last couple of years, which has been extremely beneficial. So overall, gaming activity in CORA spans the five kind of organizations that you see there. We have activities going on with academia, with TCP, the Technical Cooperation Program, which is a Five Eyes military S&T organization for those not familiar. I think everybody's familiar with NATO. But certainly with other government departments, and of course with our actual employer here in CORA, the Canadian Forces and the Department of National Defense. So I'll go through some activities that we're involved in with all those. So starting with academia, the obvious one, of course, is Professor Rex Brynan, that we all know. Really in terms of more specific activities that we have that's been going on, Ben in particular has been supporting Rex with his Poly 452 course, in participating in that course by providing guidance and comment to the students on some of the games that they've been developing as part of that course. I do want to mention as well our collaboration with Rex when it came to the COVID vaccine rollout red teaming activity. Although that was late 2020, wasn't really 2021, it's still worth mentioning as a really great example of the kind of collaboration that we've got going with McGill and with Rex. Another interesting thing what happened, one of Rex's former students, Andy Lee, got hired by CORA this last year. Andy working with Ben Taylor on some wargaming activities. So that's a very positive outcome from that collaboration, which is certainly ongoing. Turning to TTCP, under TTCP, we haven't had a lot of activity with them on wargaming for the last little while, but they do have a next generation wargaming community of interest going on. The lead is Australia. And again, there hasn't been a lot of activity in 2021 other than Australia providing us with, like an update on their activities kind of thing. Again, all due to COVID and so on, but there is a meeting of this community of interest about to occur at the end of March of this year. So this particular community of interest might be ramping up its activities in the coming year. Turning to NATO, there's a lot of activity going on in NATO with wargaming right now. I think most people online are probably familiar with NATO's Audacious Wargaming project, and there's people that are attending this conference right now that are deeply involved in that, Wayne Buck in particular. So I won't talk an awful lot about it, but and CORA ourselves, we don't have a direct contact with that. We have indirect contact through monitoring what's going on with the Audacious Wargaming project, and my own activity, SAS 170, is sort of a peripheral activity or supporting activity to what the Audacious Wargaming project is trying to achieve. I'll mention SAS 139, another project that just recently completed with their final report going into pre-release. We had one of our CORA colleagues was one of the authors of one of the chapters of that report. Then SAS 170, again, a lot of you heard about that one, of course. I'm the lead for it from Canada here. The purpose of SAS 170 is to write a best practices guidebook for NATO on the principles around distributed wargaming. And we're moving along at quite a pace right now. We just finished our data collection phase. We're really right now in the data consolidation and analysis phase. And then in the coming weeks and months and so, we'll probably get into the actual writing phase to write that guidebook and hopefully get that on the street. We'll get that on the street this year for sure. SAS 151, again, I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in just a couple of minutes here because of some of the aspects of this particular project. Again, a lot of CORA staff were directly involved in SAS 151. And what that's about is the intermediate force capabilities concept that NATO was developing. And the interesting thing about that group was they ran a very interesting series of 4 games over the last year, 2 years. And these war games were aimed at basically analyzing and assessing intermediate force capabilities in different scenarios. So again, I'll say more about that in just a second. And here we are. So I wanted to highlight some of the things that SAS 151 did because I think that this particular group, in terms of the wargaming that it did, illustrated a number of principles that I think are extremely valuable for this particular group. And in particular, I wanted to point out the basic idea of this build, test, refine concept and the learn by doing concept. And I think everybody online, everybody that's done wargaming is aware of this fundamental principle. It's a great design idea that you test you build your game, you test it and refine it, you play test it, and you improve it. And I think SAS 151 was just a superb example of this in actual practice, where their initial games were comparatively simple because of the COVID-19 situation, and they had to do everything distributed. But they learned from each game, and they put a lot of development effort into each game to improve it before they did the sort of the final run of each game. So you see there, in some cases they put in months of design, build, test before each game to make sure each game was going to meet the objectives and was going to run smoothly for the participants. So again, a great example of putting that idea of build, test, refine into actual practice. Some of the other things they did was, again, they necessarily kept their tools simple using WebEx and things like that for game level communications. They made heavy use of Google Docs, using Google Slides to represent maps and things like that. Using Google Docs for text entry, for planning from the different teams involved in the games. So again, the key thing was using tools that were easily available to everyone, distributed, and that were simple in design and could be used by anybody with minimal training. So again, the games that they ran, because I participated in a couple of them, were just a beautiful example of applying these kinds of ideas and principles to gaming when you're certainly in a distributed environment. And then in their final game, I wanted to point out in particular that they had a hybrid threat scenario in that particular game, game 4, which they ran last fall. But what I wanted to point out in particular was that game was fed by a separate game on information warfare and information operations. Again, a number of people online here today participated in this game, and it had a number of very interesting design features, which I think would be of interest to this community. And I know that Sean Havel is going to be talking tomorrow, so I don't want to steal his thunder, but this was an information warfare, information operation game, and I thought the really novel idea about this game was the way the players and the different teams would actually create messaging as if they were using social media platforms. And we literally created messages, which then went to a separate team of participants that formed what they called a jury. And that jury of players representing different factions, listened to the messages that we provided and see whether they were influenced by our messaging. And in the scenario, there was an election that was going to occur, or a referendum that had to occur. And the whole idea of the game was, would that messaging influence the members of that jury or the members of the public in the hypothetical scenario? So I thought it was a really, really interesting structure for the game. Some great game elements that I had not seen before. It worked really well. And I think they had, again, playtesting was a key thing to make that game work really effectively. Again, a beautiful example of practical application of that fundamental principle of building and testing and refining before you go live with your game. So a real great case study in how to do the gaming right, in my opinion. Okay, so back to some of the highlights. Back to my actual employer, D&D CAF. So prior to COVID, Ben and I have been heavily working with Chief Force Development, on the strategic planning side of things, and developing some war games to help our strategic planning look at capability-based planning and look at the capability requirements for the Canadian Forces. So that activity, had to go on hold, of course, due to COVID, because we couldn't do face-to-face. And a new cycle of the CBP strategic planning process is going to start later this year. And so Not sure exactly what's going to happen, but it very well could be that gaming to support this next cycle of strategic planning could in fact start perhaps later this year or early next year or something like that. We'll just have to wait and see. Another thing we've been doing is with the Canadian Army, looking at some software tools, some combat simulation models like Command, Modern Air and Naval Operations, SAMANO. But that's currently on the back burner apparently with the Army. And the Army just recently, renewed their license for the U.S.-based, U.S.-sourced, OneSAF software. And OneSAF is a well-known software tool for semi-automated forces for simulating combat that's been out there for many, many years and used a lot for analysis and for exercise and war game support. So the Canadian Army is looking back to that right now for using that. The last thing I wanted to mention was a game that Greg Van Bavel, one of my colleagues, has developed on our defense economics team, a game called the Defense Cost Estimation Game. And basically what this was a game to represent the world of D&D cost estimators. And it was really just, I have not seen the game myself, but Greg tells me as a single player game that can be played very, very quickly. It basically puts a player in the world of a defense cost estimator. And this person has to assemble the pieces and data sources and so on that someone would use if they're going to generate a cost estimate for a major project within D&D. And so this game was there to highlight the kind of problems and challenges that a cost estimator may encounter. So one thing I want to mention, of course, was COVID is the big thing hanging over all of our heads at the same time. So over 2021, CORA staff was involved in a number of COVID-related games. So Ben Taylor and his colleague Ben Williams, professor in economics in France, have been developing the After the Apex game. So they developed this in 2020. A number of iterations of the game have been run. And as you can see there's still ongoing developments where their current idea is to replace the judgment-based adjudication that they've used in previous iterations with some actual data-based models on how COVID-19 affects various aspects of society and national operations and that sort of thing. Ben, working with Andy Lee, have developed a game they called COVID-35, where it's 2035. Again, as you see there, a spreadsheet-based game where you play a nation that's facing a pandemic, and evidently they modeled adjudication after the approach used by After the Apex, and they have seen some applications of this game already with Yale National University in Singapore College and with their partners at Simon Fraser University. And the last thing I wanted to mention here was, although it wasn't 2021, I think it's important to mention again that the vaccine rollout red teaming activity that we did with Rex and some other departments in Canada from DND and Public Health Agent Canada. Again, the idea was red teaming, what could go wrong when Canada was beginning its vaccine rollout. But again, I wanted to point out some of the important things that happened there that are a great lesson for all of us when we think about gaming and how we plan our games. This game was very successful, and I think some of the key reasons that are important for us is that despite the very short timelines for the design and delivery of this game, we had the pieces in place to actually accomplish such a task in a short period of time. And I think one of the key things we had there was those informal professional networks that we have developed over the years amongst ourselves. And that's, we know each other well, through our gaming activities with each other over the years, and that paid tremendous dividends in this particular case, because we had a group of people that had a very unselfish can-do attitude, and we were just able to come together and design and get this game to run, and it was very effective. On the CORA side, CORA was asked to provide basically the framework or the underlying IT platform and environment for the game. And so myself and Ben and our colleagues, Emily Robinson and Patrick Dooley, had developed basically a gaming environment that we call SAGE. And we built that for our own purposes to support Department of National Defense. And so it was sort of a ready to go gaming environment that we could apply in a heartbeat. And that was another key thing to be able to save a lot of planning time in this game. So those informal networks, people with the can-do attitude, and then people that have thought ahead a little bit in terms of developing tools and capabilities, all came together beautifully to be able to allow us to support that game and make it a success. So the final CORA activity I want to mention was last year we ran a game that our colleague Patrick Dooley colloquially called FISH for fathoming international seafood harvesting. So this was a game about fishing activity in the Arctic. And we came together with partners at Fisheries and Oceans Canada and Global Affairs Canada to put this game together. And I had a peripheral role in it, but Ben designed the first version of this game. Patrick Dooley supported, Emily Robertson supported. And again, I wanted to highlight this particular game because, again, we went through a number of iterations of the game design. And I just want to emphasize how useful and helpful that was, and how important it is to try to build that into any kind of a game design that you're doing, build in time for the playtesting. Because in this particular game, it was an amazing evolution of this game from the very first version, which was quite rough, and it was quite slow to play. And we ran into all kinds of issues with the players providing us with their moves, and how does the adjudication team get the data? How do we adjudicate it? And how do we get the information and the results of the adjudication back to the players, in a timely way? So the first game that we ran play tested was kind of rough. We're using things like Google Docs and having the players move little graphical icons around on a Google map, or a Google Docs map anyway. And it just took a long time. It was kind of a painful process. And so over some subsequent iterations, we really improved the player-facing software that we had the players use to implement their moves. And we changed how we did the adjudication and automated a lot of it. So it had a lot of the sort of calculations that were required in this game, had a lot of that automated in the background in Excel spreadsheets that Patrick Dooley had put together. So the lesson here was, again, the playtesting was a fabulous way to improve the smooth running of the game. And it became a much better game in a lot of ways. And we kept our player-facing tools intuitive and simple. And again, based on an Excel spreadsheet, but through the playtesting, we identified certain key problems that the players were having with implementing their moves and understanding their strategies and so on. And we really helped them fix those problems by a simple tool in the Excel spreadsheet, well thought through with some of the data that they actually needed. So let me move ahead to this slide. So this is the map game board that was used in the FISH game. And I think it's a great example of another wargaming principle of really understanding what data is important in your game, and understanding what information to put in front of your players that makes sense. So being very efficient with the amount of information being put in front of your players. So in this particular case, this map is quite complicated looking, but it actually conveys a tremendous amount of information to the players in, frankly, a fairly simple graphic. And what was done was we had a supporting Excel spreadsheet with a series of drop-down menus that allowed the players to simply move their assets or indicate their moves by choosing to move an asset, from one geographic area to another. And the drop-down menu simply corresponded to all the locations that you see on the screen there. And so it was very, very easy for the players to understand how to move their pieces around. And so really, again, it's a case where you got the game mechanics out of the way so that the players could focus on their strategy and what they're really trying to achieve in the game. So again, a really great example of fundamental game design principle there of really understanding what information is important for your players, and how to make it simple for them to make their moves and communicate what they're trying to do. And that all came through playtesting, as we playtested this game 3 or 4 times, and each time we got improved significantly. So I think initially when we did the adjudication, it took maybe, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes maybe for us to adjudicate all the moves and get information back to the players. And for the actual game, it maybe only took a couple of minutes. So the players had very little downtime at the actual game, and it went very, very smoothly. So a great example of that playtesting power. Okay, so finally, what is the road ahead, I think, for our gaming activity at CORA? Well, certainly in the short term, COVID is going to remain the dominant influence, and we're still really not back in the office on any regular basis, being able to do anything face-to-face. So that will definitely shape things for the coming months. But longer term, clearly we're going to continue to develop and build CORA's gaming capability with all the organizations that I've already mentioned. So certainly when it comes to our employer, CAF-DND, we're going to ramp back up almost certainly with gaming to support strategic planning once the new cycle of capability-based planning gets started. We have a number of teams within the CORA organization and working for the Army, Navy, Air Force, et cetera. And they're all doing various types of gaming. So, but again, one of the core things we want to do in CORA is to reestablish that ability to model combat and to do combat analysis and gaming that we had years ago. and have been trying to reestablish. So I mentioned, Samano and OneSAF, that kind of thing. So yeah, we want to acquire and explore the use of various commercial off-the-shelf and government tools to do that sort of thing. Of note, the Air Warfare Center down in Trenton has acquired the US AFSIM software framework, basically, that they're now applying to some of the Air Force capability, strategic capability problems and that sort of thing. And AFSIM software can also be used there, for exercise support and things like that. The Air Warfare Center has already provided some training for CORA staff and other DRDC staff on how to use AFSIM. So we're very fortunate to have that software available to us. And of course, we will continue to look for opportunities to conduct gaming activities with other organizations internal to D&D, such as ADM Policy. We've done a couple of games with ADM Pol over the years. Obviously haven't done anything with them in the last couple of years, but they've had a couple of issues that they wanted to game, and we've had a couple of very successful games with them, and we might do more in the future. So with external organizations, again, we'll continue to develop those relationships with academia, with Simon Fraser and McGill and so on, with other government departments, certainly with Global Affairs Canada in particular. The management of CORA and Global Affairs has come together, and we've established an agreement to collaborate and share our expertise and knowledge of gaming and resources and so on, and so continue to build the strength of that ongoing relationship, which has been super for everybody. As well, as I mentioned, we did a game with Department of Fisheries and Oceans. So again, we'll look for opportunities in the future to work with any other government departments, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada as well, or organizations like that. We did a game prior to COVID with CSIS. And so again, on a case-by-case opportunity, we will happily support these organizations with our gaming expertise. So lastly, we'll want to continue to build and develop those, in particular, the informal professional networks that have paid such great dividends for us over recent years. It's just a fantastic thing to do. And so through forums like the Connection series of conferences and so on, great opportunity for everybody to build those so useful informal professional networks. And I believe that is all I have to say. So thank you very much for listening.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Murray. That's an excellent roundup of interesting amount of work. I should be very careful what I say because I seem to be implicated in a lot of it. But moving along, we had a number of questions raised in the chat. Thank you very much for posting those. The first one was from Greg Linton, who works with the Air Force in Winnipeg, asking, can we get a copy of the cost estimated game to support, I guess he's saying, supporting a modeling and simulation course that they run there. I'm sure that's possible, but you can get in touch with Murray or I. We can put you in touch with Greg, and we can sort that out.
Right.
Sorry, Murray, I'm answering your question for you.
No, well, on that one, I would just point out that from what I understand, because I have not personally seen or played the game, but I understand it's a game where you do not do a cost estimate. That's not what the game is about. What the game is about is you pretend to be a cost estimator, and you are assembling all of the pieces that you would need to generate a cost estimate. So you'd need data from various sources. So you'd need to establish relationships with certain subject matter experts or get access to certain data sources. That's what the game is about, apparently, is you have this spectrum of pieces that you need for a cost estimate. And the game is to look at the challenges of actually getting those pieces put together. So if that helps you, great. We can certainly put you in contact with Greg Van Babel.
Thank you. Okay, the second question up was from Hiro Akutsu, who's in Japan, asking how many times did you play test? Any idea about how frequently playtesting should occur before an actual real play with time constraints in mind? Now, I'm not quite sure which of the games you were mentioning that comment applied to. If you want to clarify in the text, Hiro, we can certainly answer that question. But Murray, general observations on the issue of the value of playtest.
Well, I mentioned a lot of playtesting, in particular with, say, SAS 151 and with the fish game. Now, on the SAS 151 side, again, speaking for them, but I was vaguely familiar with sort of what they were doing. I was kind of tracking what their activity was. They did specifically plan in playtesting time into their program of work. So they specifically built time in for playtesting. So how many times did they playtest? I'm not really sure in any particular time, but I participated in one or two of their playtests. So I think they did more frequent than I'm aware of. But I think the key thing was they built that into their program of work right to start with. And so that allowed them to get a better handle on how many times they could play test. So again, a highly recommended way of doing it. In the case of the fish game, that was somewhat of a target of opportunity. We knew what our timeline was for delivery of the game because we had a rough date for when the game was going to be delivered. And then really depending, because it was being developed at our end by local CORA staff on our internal networks, we just had sort of internal communication that said, hey, can we play test next Thursday? Or is everybody available to play test next Thursday? So when the development of the game got to a certain stage, we were sort of at a point where we said, yeah, let's play test it at this point. So that's how that kind of went. And it was more of an ad hoc kind of thing. But I think we play tested at least, I'm thinking at least 3 times before we sort of unleashed the game to the sponsors for a real test of it. I hope that answers the question.
Right. There's a clarification of the question saying it applies to game 4, but I'm not quite sure which game 4 on your
okay, game 4 had to do with the SAS 151 hybrid game and the information warfare, information ops game in particular. So yeah, I participated in a couple of the play tests on the IWIO game that Sean Havel will talk to you about tomorrow. So I'm aware of at least, I think, at least 2 play tests, maybe 3. Sean can clarify that, but at least 2 or 3 play tests before the actual game was delivered. And I was involved in a couple of the play tests, and I definitely saw an improvement, absolutely a tremendous improvement in the game structure and the game play flow. So you just can't play test enough if you have the opportunity. So recommended to build it into your program of work.
Oh, I think that's sound advice. There have never been too many play tests. Exactly. Okay, third question from Dennis Thompson. Has CORA provided analysis for the draft Canadian Armed Forces Pan-Domain Force Employment concept, or for the emerging restructuring of the land forces under the Army 2025 initiative?
I have no idea. I don't have any visibility on that. No. So I'm not sure if there's anybody online that's in a better position to respond to that. I'm not sure if George Nikolakakis is online from the Army side, but yeah, I can't answer because I'm not aware of that at all.
I'm not aware either. Okay, so
yeah, sorry, Murray. This is Dave Connell. When I worked at the Warfare Center, I mean the PFEC was important, but it is still not an approved concept per se or adopted across the CAF. So it's in a bit of a twilight zone right now in terms of are we going to adopt it and how are we going to adopt it? Notwithstanding that, there are efforts to explore a future command and control approach, which naturally will incorporate many of the items that are in the PFEC, but the PFEC itself is still not wholly accepted and adopted.
Okay, thanks, Dave.
Right, well, that wraps up the questions we have. Oh, sorry, we have another question come in from Stephen Downs Martin. The last before we move on. The question here is, how did you organize your play tests into test tech, test game processes for bottlenecks, test design, satisfies objectives? How many each did you do? Now, I think, well, Murray, you may be able to, I mean, since this work is going to be briefed again tomorrow, maybe it will be more appropriate to talk to the actual game designer then. But Murray, do you have any sort of observations on that? Sort of, how did you break your test? How are tests broken down between what they're aiming to do?
Yeah, well, it varies a little bit from game to game, but I'll focus a little bit more on the IWIO game for SAS 151, just because I had more direct feedback to Sean. And well, we didn't have any, we weren't given like a formal framework to evaluate the playtest or anything like that. So it was just the observations that we had coming out of each playtest about what things we thought could be improved. So they definitely fell into many of the categories that Stephen just mentioned in terms of the process of gameplay, scenario issues in particular, play issues from the player perspective using tools and things like that. So again, there was no formal framework, but I think that a lot of the feedback did cover most of the areas that Stephen was mentioning. But Sean will be able to give certainly more specific details tomorrow.
Great. Okay, in that case, thank you very much, Murray, for fascinating brief and a good broad update of work going on within CORA. So we're now going to move on to our second presenter for this session, Robert Engen from Canadian Forces College. So we're going to have a different perspective here, another